Get on your knees. Now, hands up.
Okay, I'm complying.
Don't look at me. Keep your hands where I can see them. So what are you really doing out here?
I'm loading groceries, sir. I just finished shopping.
You live around here or you just passing through?
I live about 15 minutes away.
How you afford a car like that?
I work. I have a good job.
Ever been to prison?
The sunny Wednesday morning of March 25, 2025 began normally for Darius Chen, a 26-year-old content creator with 4.3 million TikTok followers and 2.8 million on Instagram, who had just finished his weekly shopping at the Whole Foods supermarket in Dallas. It was 10:14 a.m. when he wheeled his shopping cart to his blue sedan in the parking lot, opened the trunk, and began transferring bags of organic produce, fresh fruit, and other items. Darius had been listening to music in his AirPods, occasionally filming casual content for his social media, completely unaware a patrol car had stopped behind his vehicle and an officer was approaching with suspicion. What happened in the next 30 minutes would be captured both by the officer's body camera and Darius's own phone, becoming one of the most watched viral videos of 2025, and costing the officer his career while exposing blatant racial profiling captured in real time by someone whose life was documenting and sharing experiences online. Darius Chen had built his social media empire over 4 years, creating content about lifestyle, technology, and his experiences navigating the world as a successful young black man. His videos ranged from gadget reviews and apartment tours to honest commentary about racism he encountered in his daily life. Darius had become particularly known for documenting racial profiling encounters, always keeping a camera recording and remaining calm, even in potentially volatile situations. He had transformed these experiences into educational content that resonated with millions of followers who either shared similar experiences or were learning about realities black people faced. His content was polished, well-edited, and often included captions and context explaining legal rights and how to handle various situations. The officer who would approach Darius that morning was Brian Kowalski, a 9-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department. Kowalski had a history that included 3 previous complaints for racial profiling, 2 investigations for using inappropriate language during stops, and a reputation among some colleagues for being overly aggressive with suspects, particularly young black men. He had developed a pattern over the years of making pretextual stops in high-income areas when he saw black people he judged didn't belong there. Kowalski also had a social media presence where he had posted politically conservative opinions and made derogatory comments about social justice movements, including posts suggesting complaints about racial profiling were exaggerated or fabricated. That specific morning, Kowalski was patrolling an upper, middle-class neighborhood that included the Whole Foods where Darius had shopped. He saw Darius unloading groceries from his blue sedan and apparently decided to investigate. Though there was no suspicious activity, no law violation, no legitimate reason for police contact. Darius was literally doing what millions of people do every day without ever having police officers question them, transferring grocery bags from a cart to a car trunk in a public parking lot. But Kowalski saw a young black man with locks in a hoodie in an expensive area, and that apparently was enough to trigger his suspicions and prejudices. Kowalski parked his patrol car directly behind Darius's sedan, effectively blocking his exit, and activated his body camera per protocol. He exited his vehicle and walked toward Darius, who was still focused on organizing bags in his trunk while occasionally checking his phone for notifications from his social platforms. Darius noticed the officer approaching and immediately recognized this could be another one of those moments he had documented many times before. He casually reached for his phone, which was balanced on his shopping cart, and began recording, positioning it so it would capture both his own perspective and the officer approaching. This would be content, but it would also be evidence if the situation escalated. Kowalski stopped a few feet from Darius and began his interrogation without any greeting or explanation of why he was making contact. He asked Darius what he was doing there, a question so obviously nonsensical given Darius was literally standing beside a shopping cart full of grocery bags that it immediately revealed this wasn't about legitimate investigation. Darius, whose experience with racial profiling had taught him to stay calm and document everything, responded politely he was putting his groceries in his car. Kowalski then asked the question that would be replayed millions of times on social media. He asked if Darius lived in the area or was just passing through. The implication was clear. Kowalski was questioning whether Darius belonged in that neighborhood, suggesting a young black man shopping at an upscale Whole Foods was somehow suspicious or out of place. Darius responded to Kowalski that he lived about 15 minutes away and frequently shopped at that Whole Foods, a completely reasonable answer that should have ended the interaction. But Kowalski pressed further, asking where specifically Darius lived, what street, what type of residence. Darius, whose phone camera was still recording discreetly from the shopping cart, recognized these as phishing questions without legal basis. He politely but firmly told Kowalski he had no obligation to provide his address when he wasn't being investigated for any crime, that he was on public property, doing legal activity, and that he would like to know why he was being questioned while putting groceries in his own vehicle. Kowalski's body camera captured every word of this exchange, preserving evidence of an officer interrogating a citizen doing completely mundane activity without any articulable suspicion. Kowalski shifted tactics, saying he had received reports of vehicle thefts in the area and was checking on everyone who looked suspicious. Darius immediately caught this, asking what specifically looked suspicious about someone unloading grocery bags in broad daylight in a public parking lot. Kowalski stumbled over his response, eventually saying Darius's vehicle matched the vague description from a report. Darius asked for details about that description, noting a blue sedan was one of the most common vehicle types on the road, and that without more specific information about make, model, or plates, any blue sedan would technically match. He also pointed out that if Kowalski had legitimate concerns about a stolen vehicle, he could simply run the plates through dispatch rather than interrogating the owner. Kowalski's frustration was becoming visible on both the body camera recording and Darius's phone video. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by young black men he apparently expected to be intimidated by his authority. Kowalski told Darius his attitude was making things more difficult than they needed to be, that if he just cooperated by providing identification and answering questions, everyone could go about their lives. Darius responded he was cooperating by answering questions Kowalski had legal basis to ask, but that cooperation didn't mean surrendering constitutional rights or submitting to interrogation based purely on racial profiling. He also noted this wasn't the first time he had been stopped or questioned while doing normal activities, and that he understood his rights perfectly well. Kowalski then made a significant tactical mistake that would reveal exactly how unfamiliar he was with social media and internet culture. He saw Darius's phone recording and told him to turn off the camera, that recording police officers could be interpreted as interference with an investigation. Darius, whose entire content was about knowing legal rights and documenting encounters, responded calmly he had an absolute First Amendment right to record police officers in public spaces performing official duties, that multiple Supreme Court precedents had confirmed this right, and that he would continue recording for his own protection and to create a record of what was happening. He also noted Kowalski's own body camera was recording, so clearly there was nothing wrong with documenting the interaction. At this point, a middle-aged woman named Sandra Morrison, who had just finished her own shopping and was loading her SUV a few spaces away, noticed the interaction and began watching. Sandra had seen Darius multiple times at that Whole Foods over the months. They often smiled at each other in recognition as regular customers, and she had actually followed some of his social media accounts after recognizing him from his profile picture. She saw Kowalski questioning Darius and immediately recognized something was wrong with how the officer was treating a customer doing normal shopping. Sandra took out her own phone and began recording from her angle, creating a third stream of video evidence beyond Kowalski's body camera and Darius's phone. Kowalski saw Sandra recording and told her to move along, that this wasn't her business. Sandra responded that as a customer and resident of that neighborhood, it absolutely was her business when she saw a police officer apparently harassing another customer without clear reason. She also said she recognized Darius from shopping there regularly and had never seen him do anything that would warrant police scrutiny. Kowalski warned Sandra that interfering with a police investigation could result in her own detention. Sandra, who happened to be an attorney, responded she understood perfectly well the law on interference and that standing at a safe distance while recording an interaction in public space didn't constitute interference under any reasonable legal interpretation. Kowalski, now clearly frustrated by having his authority questioned by both Darius and Sandra, made the decision that would change everything. He told Darius to put his hands on his vehicle and prepare to be searched. Darius asked under what legal authority Kowalski was conducting a search, pointing out he hadn't been stopped for a crime. There was no basis to believe he was armed and dangerous, and that he was on public property doing legal activity. Kowalski responded that for his own officer's safety, he had the right to search anyone during an investigation. Darius held his ground, saying clearly for the camera he wasn't consenting to search, that he wasn't resisting, but was exercising his Fourth Amendment right against illegal search. Kowalski then did something so outrageous that even Sandra, watching from a distance, let out an audible gasp of shock. He ordered Darius to kneel on the parking lot ground, saying he was detaining him for suspicion of criminal activity and that Darius needed to comply or face additional charges of resisting detention. Darius stood there, hands visible, and asked calmly but firmly what specific crime Kowalski suspected he had committed that justified detention and an order to kneel in a public parking lot. Kowalski repeated his vague claims about stolen vehicles and suspicious behavior. Darius, whose phone was capturing everything at an angle that would perfectly show his calm face and non-threatening hands, said for the camera he had committed no crime, that he was unloading grocery bags, and that he was being ordered to kneel by an officer who couldn't articulate any reasonable suspicion. Sandra immediately called out from across the parking lot that she was recording everything, that she was an attorney, and that Kowalski was clearly violating Darius's rights by ordering him to kneel without probable cause. She also shouted she had witnessed the entire interaction from the beginning and that Darius had done nothing but put groceries in his car. Kowalski turned briefly toward Sandra and told her one last time to leave or be arrested. Sandra held her position, continuing to record, and said loudly she wasn't leaving when she was witnessing what appeared to be clear racial profiling and abuse of authority. Her presence as a witness and the way she was verbally documenting what she was seeing added a critical layer of third-party validation to what the cameras were capturing. Darius made the decision to reveal information he had been holding back, recognizing the situation was escalating in ways that could become dangerous. He told Kowalski he had 4.3 million TikTok followers, 2.8 million on Instagram, and that this encounter was being recorded and likely already being live streamed to hundreds of thousands of people through his auto-upload features he had configured on his phone. He noted Kowalski was creating viral content that would be viewed by millions of people within hours, and that every second of the interaction was being documented from multiple angles, including Kowalski's own body camera. He suggested Kowalski might want to reconsider ordering someone to kneel in a supermarket parking lot without any actual legal justification. The mention of millions of followers and live streaming seemed to confuse Kowalski more than give him pause. He apparently didn't fully understand what Darius was saying about his social media presence or the implications of having such a large platform. Kowalski questioned whether Darius was threatening him, suggesting mentioning social media followers was some kind of attempt to intimidate an officer. Darius responded calmly he wasn't threatening anyone, was simply stating a fact that he had a large public platform and this encounter was being documented and shared in real time. He also noted that if Kowalski had legitimate concerns about criminal activity, he could articulate them specifically rather than relying on vague claims and orders without legal basis. Multiple other shoppers in the parking lot had noticed the confrontation and were stopping to watch and record on their own phones. What had begun as one officer's stop of a black man unloading groceries was rapidly transforming into a public spectacle with a growing audience both physically present and online. Darius's phone was receiving constant notifications of comments and shares as his auto-upload content began circulating through his networks, with followers reacting in real time to what they were witnessing. Some followers were actually calling the Dallas Police Department to report they were watching live as an officer harassed a known content creator without justification. Kowalski, apparently realizing he had lost control of the situation but unable to back down without admitting He had made a mistake, doubled down. He reached for Darius and attempted to physically force him to kneel, placing a hand on Darius's shoulder and applying downward pressure. Darius immediately stepped back, his hands coming up defensively in a surrender posture, and said loudly and clearly for all the cameras he wasn't resisting arrest, but was moving away from unauthorized physical force, that Kowalski had no probable cause to arrest him, and that any use of force would be captured on video from multiple angles, including the officer's own body camera. Darius's narration of his own actions was precise and deliberate, establishing on the video record exactly what was happening and that he was exercising rights while presenting no threat. Sandra had called 911 at this point, reporting she was witnessing a police officer using force against an unarmed man at the Whole Foods supermarket parking lot, that the man was clearly just unloading groceries, and that the officer hadn't articulated any legal basis for detention or use of force. The dispatcher asked if anyone was injured or if weapons were involved. Sandra responded no, but that the situation was escalating and a supervisor should respond immediately before someone got hurt. The dispatcher confirmed she was sending a supervisor to the location and asked Sandra to remain on the line and continue updating about the situation. A second patrol car arrived within 6 minutes, apparently responding both to Sandra's 911 call and to notifications the department had been receiving through social media about the ongoing incident. The officer who exited was Sergeant Lisa Chen, an 18-year veteran known for her professional approach and ability to de-escalate tense situations. Chen immediately assessed the scene: Darius standing with hands in surrender position, multiple people recording on phones, shopping cart still full of bags next to a blue sedan with trunk open, and Kowalski visibly agitated and defensive. She approached and asked Kowalski what the situation was, why he had called for backup at a supermarket parking lot. Kowalski began explaining he had stopped a suspicious individual for possible vehicle theft, and that the individual was being uncooperative and possibly live streaming the encounter for purposes of harassing police. Before he could finish, Darius politely cut in and told Chen he was Darius Chen, a content creator with millions of followers, that he had been simply unloading groceries. When Kowalski had approached him without reason, that he had answered questions but refused to submit to a legal interrogation and search, and that Kowalski had then ordered him to kneel in the parking lot without articulating any probable cause. He also noted the entire interaction had been recorded by multiple cameras, including Kowalski's body camera, and was being viewed live by hundreds of thousands of people online. Chen looked from Kowalski to Darius, then to the grocery bags still visible in the cart and trunk, then to Sandra and other observers, all recording on their phones. She asked Kowalski what specific crime he was investigating, or what behavior had created reasonable suspicion for a stop. Kowalski mentioned vague report of stolen vehicle and suspicious behavior. Chen asked if he had run the plates to verify theft status. Kowalski admitted no, he had based his stop purely on visual match and officer instinct. Chen asked what specific behavior besides unloading groceries had seemed suspicious. Kowalski couldn't articulate anything concrete beyond statements about the area and appearance. Chen, whose expression was becoming progressively more serious, turned to Darius and asked if he had provided any identification voluntarily. Darius responded to Chen he had offered to show identification once Kowalski articulated legal basis for demanding it, but that he wasn't providing documents in response to unjustified demands based on racial profiling. He then took out his wallet voluntarily and handed Chen not just his driver's license, but also several business cards identifying him as a professional content creator with URLs to his social media platforms. Chen looked at the documents, then discreetly checked her own phone, apparently searching for Darius's name. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw his follower counts and recognized she was dealing with someone who had a massive public platform, and that this incident was already likely spreading virally through multiple social networks. Chen immediately apologized to Darius, returned his identification, and said he was free to go, that there was no legal basis for any detention. She then turned to Kowalski and told him in a low but firm voice she needed to speak with him privately. But before they could step away, Darius said he appreciated Chen recognizing the stop was unjustified, but that he wasn't simply letting this go. He wanted Kowalski's full name and badge number formally recorded, wanted confirmation all body camera footage would be preserved, and would be filing a formal complaint, not just about the harassment, but about Kowalski's attempt to use physical force and order him to kneel without legal justification. He also noted he had video evidence from multiple angles and hundreds of thousands of online witnesses who had watched live. Chen confirmed she understood that she would personally ensure all video evidence was preserved and that she would be filing a detailed report about Kowalski's conduct. She also asked permission to obtain a copy of Darius's phone video as additional evidence. Darius agreed, noting the video was already uploaded to his cloud servers and was being shared through his social networks at that very moment. Chen then apologized to Sandra for having witnessed such problematic conduct and thanked her for intervening and documenting. Sandra said she would voluntarily provide her cell phone video and written statement as a witness, and that as an attorney, she was prepared to testify in any proceedings that resulted. Kowalski stood there looking progressively paler as the reality of how seriously he had gotten himself into trouble sank in. Chen told him to return to his vehicle and make no additional contact with Darius or any witnesses. She then spent the next 15 minutes collecting statements from Darius, Sandra, and several other shoppers who had witnessed parts of the interaction. Each witness confirmed the same basic narrative. Darius had been unloading groceries when Kowalski approached without apparent reason, interrogated him without justification, escalated the situation by demanding identification and search, and then ordered him to kneel in the parking lot without articulating any actual crime or reasonable suspicion. While this was happening, Darius's video was exploding through social media at breathtaking speed. Within 30 minutes of the encounter ending, his video had been viewed over 800,000 times on TikTok and was trending on Twitter with the hashtag #FenWholeFoodsProfiling. People were outraged seeing a young man clearly unloading groceries being harassed and ordered to kneel by an officer who couldn't articulate any actual justification. Sandra's video provided additional angle that clearly showed both the grocery bags and Darius's non-threatening body language, while Darius's own recording captured crisp audio of the entire exchange, including Kowalski's attempt to make him turn off his camera and the order to kneel. Darius finally completed loading his groceries into his vehicle, but not before filming a closing video sitting in his car, explaining to his followers what had just happened. He spoke calmly but clearly about being racially profiled while doing completely normal activity, about knowing his rights and refusing to submit to illegal demands, and about the importance of documenting such encounters. He noted that if he hadn't had a camera recording, if he hadn't known his rights, if witnesses like Sandra hadn't intervened, the situation could have ended very differently, potentially with him arrested or injured based purely on Kowalski's word against his. The video gained 1.2 million views in the first 2 hours. The Dallas Police Department began receiving massive volume of calls, emails, and social media messages within hours of the video going viral. People demanded to know why an officer had harassed a known content creator in a supermarket parking lot, why he had ordered an unarmed man to kneel without probable cause, and what action the department would take to hold Kowalski accountable. The department's public relations division was being overwhelmed with media inquiries, with multiple major news outlets requesting official statements and interviews about the incident. The police chief was briefed on the situation Saturday morning and ordered an immediate internal affairs investigation. Kowalski was placed on immediate administrative leave Saturday afternoon, removed from all patrol duties, pending completion of the internal affairs investigation. His body camera recording was formally preserved as evidence, and investigators also obtained copies of Darius's viral TikTok video, Sandra's cell phone video, and security camera recordings from the Whole Foods parking lot that captured the incident from additional angles. The convergence of multiple video streams created a comprehensive and irrefutable record of every aspect of the interaction, making it impossible for Kowalski to later claim events had happened differently than the video clearly showed. Investigators also discovered that during the 30 minutes of the encounter, over 400,000 people had watched live through Darius's auto upload features, effectively creating hundreds of thousands of digital witnesses. The video continued spreading exponentially through the weekend. By Sunday morning, Darius's original TikTok had been viewed 8.7 million times, his follow-up video explaining the incident had 6.2 million views, and clips from the encounter were trending on Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, and multiple other platforms. Major news outlets began covering the story, with headlines like, "Influencer with millions of followers ordered to kneel while unloading groceries," and "Dallas officer caught on video racially profiling content creator." The aspect of Darius having a massive public platform made the story particularly viral, with many people noting the irony of an officer choosing to harass literally one of the last people you'd want to racially profile if you didn't want to be exposed to millions of witnesses. Celebrities and other influencers with large platforms began sharing Darius's video and commenting on the incident. Multiple personalities with followings numbering in the tens of millions reposted the clips, adding their own reactions of shock and outrage. Some influencers who had similar experiences of racial profiling shared their own stories, creating a broader conversation about how Black content creators navigated public spaces. The collective attention from multiple large platforms meant that within 48 hours, the video had reached an estimated audience of over 50 million people globally, making it one of the most widely viewed racial profiling videos ever captured. The Internal Affairs investigation revealed a troubling pattern of Kowalski's behavior that mirrored what investigators had found in previous cases. He had made 63 traffic stops in the 6 months prior to Darius's incident. Of those 63 stops, 47 involved Black motorists, despite Black residents representing only 24% of the population in his assigned patrol zone. Of stops involving white motorists, 81% resulted in verbal warnings. Of stops involving Black motorists, 68% resulted in citations, vehicle searches, or attempts to search people. The statistical data painted a clear picture of an officer disproportionately targeting Black citizens and treating them more harshly than white citizens for similar behaviors or absence of suspicious behavior. Investigators also reviewed Kowalski's social media posts and discovered a history of comments demonstrating clear racial bias. He had posted multiple times about influencers and content creators in derogatory ways, suggesting they didn't have real jobs and often caused problems for attention. He had shared memes and articles questioning the legitimacy of racial profiling complaints, characterizing such allegations as attempts to avoid accountability or victimize police. He had also liked and commented on posts defending aggressive police tactics in predominantly minority neighborhoods. The social media record provided context for his actions during the incident with Darius, suggesting his prejudices about both race and internet culture had informed his decision to stop and harass Darius. The internal investigation report was completed 4 weeks after the incident, and its findings were devastating for Kowalski. Investigators determined he had violated multiple departmental policies, including prohibitions against racial profiling, requirements to articulate reasonable suspicion before stops, standards for conducting consensual versus forced searches, and prohibitions against excessive force or unnecessary commands like ordering someone to kneel without safety justification. The report specifically found Kowalski had no reasonable suspicion to approach Darius, no legal justification to demand identification or conduct a search, no basis to order him to kneel, and had demonstrated clear racial bias in his assumptions about who belonged in high-income areas. The report also severely criticized 3 supervisors who had reviewed and minimized Kowalski's 3 previous racial profiling complaints without adequate investigation or corrective action. Investigators noted that, if any of these complaints had been taken seriously, Kowalski's pattern of problematic behavior could have been identified and addressed before escalating to public harassment captured by millions of online witnesses. The failure in adequate supervision had allowed Kowalski to operate for 9 years with essentially zero accountability until finally doing something so publicly visible it couldn't be ignored. The investigators' recommendation was immediate employment termination, permanent revocation of police certification, and referral to the district attorney for possible criminal charges of deprivation of rights under color of law and oppressive official conduct. The police chief accepted the termination recommendation without hesitation, understanding defending Kowalski would be both legally indefensible and public relations suicide given the millions of people who had watched the video evidence. Kowalski was officially fired 6 weeks after ordering Darius to kneel in the Whole Foods parking lot. His 9-year career ended by a pattern of racial profiling that culminated in public harassment so viral it reached global consciousness. Darius filed a federal civil lawsuit against Kowalski personally, the Dallas Police Department, and the city 4 months after the incident, alleging violations of First and Fourth Amendment rights, false imprisonment, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and municipal liability for failure to properly train and supervise officers with known patterns of racial profiling. The lawsuit sought not just compensatory damages but also substantial punitive damages and comprehensive policy changes. His legal team, composed of attorneys specializing in civil rights and social media cases, built a case that was virtually bulletproof, grounded in the multiple video recordings viewed by tens of millions of people and reinforced by real-time documentation of the massive public reaction the incident had generated. The city initially tried to defend the case, but the evidence was simply too overwhelming and publicly visible. The viral video had been watched over 80 million times across multiple platforms, becoming one of the most viewed racial profiling videos in internet history. Every second of the encounter had been dissected by legal commentators, civil rights activists, and millions of social media users who created clips, memes, and reaction content. Kowalski's attempt to make Darius turn off his camera became a particularly viral example of officers trying to suppress documentation of misconduct. The order to kneel without justification became a symbol of how racial profiling could escalate to humiliation and potential violence. The final settlement, reached 11 months after the incident, awarded Darius $1,100,000 in damages, one of the largest racial profiling settlements in Texas. But for Darius, who already earned substantial income from his social media content and brand partnerships, the money was less important than the policy changes included in the settlement. The city agreed to implement mandatory, quarterly retraining on racial profiling and First Amendment rights for all officers, creation of an independent civilian review board with power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline, implementation of a robust early warning system to identify officers with troubling stop patterns, and publication of quarterly data on police stops disaggregated by race and including information about whether searches were conducted and outcomes. Perhaps most significantly, the settlement required the department to create a social media liaison position responsible for monitoring and responding to reports of police misconduct shared on social platforms. The recognition that incidents like Darius's were increasingly being documented and shared online, reaching massive audiences before departments even knew they had happened, forced the department to adapt its practices for the digital age where any police encounter could go viral within minutes. The creation of this position represented systemic change in how police departments needed to operate in an era where citizens had cameras and platforms to reach millions. Darius transformed his experience into comprehensive educational content that reached even larger audiences than the original viral video. He created a series detailing legal rights during police encounters, demonstrating proper recording techniques, explaining how to file complaints, and providing resources for victims of racial profiling. The series was viewed over 100 million times across multiple platforms and became a widely shared resource used by educators, attorneys, and advocacy groups. Darius also used a portion of his settlement to establish a legal defense fund for content creators and social media activists who faced retaliation for documenting police misconduct, providing resources for those who didn't have his platform or financial means. Media coverage of the case extended far beyond traditional outlets to include deep analysis from social media commentators, podcasters, and content creators who explored the intersection of race, technology, and law enforcement. The incident sparked conversations about how social media was changing police accountability by making it impossible for departments to ignore misconduct captured and shared by millions. Some commentators noted Kowalski had essentially chosen the worst possible person to racially profile from a potential exposure standpoint, someone whose entire life revolved around documenting experiences and sharing them with massive audiences. Kowalski disappeared from public life after his firing, but the viral video ensured his face and name remained recognizable to millions of people. He tried multiple jobs in private security and other fields, but employers invariably recognized him from the viral video or discovered his identity through online searches. The phrase, Whole Foods officer, became associated with him in ways that followed him regardless of where he tried to start over. He eventually moved to another state and found work in a field completely unrelated to law enforcement. His life permanently altered by 30 minutes of racial profiling captured from multiple angles and watched by tens of millions of people. Sandra Morrison, the attorney who had intervened and documented the incident, became a vocal advocate for police reform and citizens' rights to record officers. She gave interviews on multiple news outlets about the importance of witnesses intervening when they saw possible misconduct, about why First Amendment rights to record police were so critical, and about how technology was changing power dynamics between citizens and law enforcement. Sandra also worked with technology firms to develop apps that automatically backed up recordings of police encounters to cloud servers, ensuring evidence couldn't be lost or destroyed even if phones were confiscated or damaged. The Whole Foods, where the incident had occurred, experienced an initial wave of solidarity from shoppers, with many people specifically making a point to shop there and post about supporting a business where Darius had been wronged. The store's management issued a statement condemning racial profiling and affirming all customers were welcome regardless of race. They also installed signage throughout the parking lot noting the property had video surveillance and that recordings would be provided to victims of misconduct upon request. The incident became part of that store location's identity, with employees and regular customers occasionally referencing it as a reminder of why documentation and advocacy mattered. The video recordings of the incident became some of the most widely used training tools in the country for teaching both police officers and citizens about constitutional rights and social media culture. Police academies use the video to teach recruits about the dangers of making stops based on assumptions rather than observable facts, about how Kowalski's attempt to make Darius stop recording demonstrated fundamental misunderstanding of First Amendment rights, and about how encounters could go viral instantly in the social media age. The video was also used in law schools, teaching about Fourth Amendment rights, and in media studies courses, discussing how social platforms were changing public accountability. Darius occasionally reflected on that Wednesday morning and the surreal experience of having a routine racial profiling encounter transform into a global viral phenomenon. He noted he had countless similar encounters throughout his life, moments of being questioned or treated with suspicion while doing completely normal activities. The difference this time was he had not just a camera, but a platform to reach tens of millions of people almost instantly. That platform had transformed what could have been just another undocumented incident of racial profiling into a case that forced systemic changes and generated global conversations about race, technology, and law enforcement. The experience also changed how Darius approached content creation. He became more deliberate about using his platform for education and advocacy, balancing his lifestyle and tech content with commentary on social justice and civil rights. His following had grown significantly after the viral incident, many people finding him through the Whole Foods video and then staying for his other content. He used that expanded audience to amplify voices of other Black creators, to share resources about legal rights, and to document ongoing encounters with racial profiling that he and others experienced. The lasting legacy of the case extended far beyond a $1 million settlement or one police department's reforms. It became globally cited in discussions about the intersection of social media and police accountability, used in court cases establishing citizens' rights to record officers, and incorporated into curricula teaching about how technology was changing power dynamics. The case demonstrated that in the digital age, police misconduct captured on video could reach global audiences within hours, that influencers and content creators with large platforms had unique power to expose injustice, and that attempts to suppress documentation or accountability could backfire spectacularly when shared with millions of online witnesses. For Black communities, the case offered validation of experiences that had been consistently dismissed or minimized. Seeing an influencer with a massive platform experience the exact type of racial profiling common people faced regularly helped legitimize those complaints and demonstrate that status. Education and success didn't protect black people from being seen as suspicious. For law enforcement, it provided an impossible to ignore lesson about how the digital age had fundamentally changed accountability. That any police encounter could potentially be viewed by millions, and that officers who engaged in racial profiling or misconduct risked not just legal consequences, but global viral humiliation. Darius occasionally returned to that Whole Foods, partly because it was convenient but also because he refused to let the incident drive him away from places he had every right to use. Employees often recognized and greeted him warmly, some expressing gratitude for him standing up for his rights in ways that benefited everyone. Other shoppers occasionally stopped to thank him for his advocacy or share their own experiences of racial profiling. The parking lot where everything had happened became, for many people, a symbol of how documentation and social media platforms could transform individual moments of injustice into catalysts for broader change. The 30 minutes Darius had spent being harassed in that parking lot had been captured from multiple angles, viewed by tens of millions of people, and transformed into a case that forced a police department to implement reforms and an officer to lose his career. But for Darius, the deeper significance lay in how the incident had demonstrated the power of combining knowledge of rights with technology and platform to create accountability. He had transformed an experience of racial profiling into educational content that empowered millions of people to know and exercise their own rights, into advocacy that forced systemic changes, and into a permanent reminder that in the digital age, witnesses were no longer just those physically present, but potentially millions of people online watching in real time. The reforms that followed Darius's case were imperfect and faced resistance from some within law enforcement who saw changes as overreaction or invasion of privacy. But they represented fundamental recognition that policing in the social media age required adaptation, that citizens had rights to document encounters, and that accountability could no longer rely solely on internal systems when encounters could be shared with global audiences instantly. And while policy reforms alone couldn't eliminate racial profiling or guarantee no other Darius would be harassed while unloading groceries, they represented progress won through one person's willingness to use his platform to transform a moment of injustice into a catalyst for systemic change that would eventually benefit countless others.